All right, I want to get into this. Steve, a third shoot down of an unidentified high-altitude object in as many days, the latest yesterday over Lake Huron. What is going on here?
I have no idea. I mean, even one of the military guys who was interviewed, they wouldn't rule out it was some UFO. I mean, that's really stupid, because can you imagine the conspiracy theories that are being hatched all over the country right now, even as we speak, Susan? It could be a UFO. It could be some. I mean, I understand the appeal of this, but it's sort of pop news. It's not real news. I mean, certainly the Chinese balloon and the threat to national security was a serious issue, but now you're getting into kind of crazy stuff. And I think it's in some ways I understand people want to be upfront about this and want to say we don't want to be accused of hiding anything, but the way this is coming out, all that is going to do is foster conspiracy theories. And we know in today's social media environment how quickly the craziness can spread, right? Almost instantaneously. Think about the tenacious nature of all of the false stories about the 2020 election, which continue to ripple through social media, even though they've been proved over and over and over and over again to be false, and they're still out there. And I predict that you're just going to see this wave of increasingly crazy speculation and conspiracy theories.
The spy balloon last week would seem bad enough, but now to get 3 more objects in the past 3 days in U.S. and Canadian territory, and now to hear China is accusing the U.S. of flying more than 10 surveillance balloons into Chinese airspace in the last year. Where are we with the relations between the U.S. and China?
Well, they're not good, and there's a lot of suspiciousness. And look, everybody knows everybody spies on everybody else. Come on, this just in. There are spies. This just in, and we've had the satellite technology is so enormously improved. I mean, it's sort of the oddity that people are focusing on the balloons when, in fact, every single day, countless spy satellites circle the globe. And we've gotten a taste of that during the Ukraine war, where we get these stunning photographs from some satellites that have documented some of the atrocities in Ukraine and documented troop movements in Ukraine. And the notion that we're fretting over a couple of balloons, when in fact the world is covered by these high-powered satellites that are taking pictures of everything every minute of every day. So I don't think it should be a surprise to anybody that we're spying on China and China's spying on us, and that's always been true. But now the technology makes it far more effective.
Do we kind of wait and hold our thoughts until after we know what we've collected here, what they actually were trying to get from us?
Well, as I say, there's a tension here, right? Because on one hand, you don't want to be accused of a cover-up. You don't want to be accused of withholding vital information to the American public, right? So there's this impulse to go out there and say, we shot these down, and this is what we know about them. But the way this is coming out, sort of shrouded in uncertainty and mystery, as I've said, is only going to nourish and nurture and accelerate a wave of conspiracy theories. And that's the nature of the modern internet, that these, it's a marvelous tool. And it has democratized the world of information. You don't have to work for WBEN, and you don't have to work for the New York Times to have a voice in today's modern media universe. And the whole world has been democratized. But as we lower the barrier to entry to the media marketplace for good information, we lower the barrier for bad information. The internet can be a cesspool of misinformation and disinformation and conspiracy theories. And I'm just afraid that that's exactly what's going to happen here.
All right. Coming off the State of the Union, which was last week, and 2024 is really coming into focus now. On the GOP side, we know Nikki Haley is going to be announcing soon. What about President Biden? Where does that stand?
Well, look, I think Biden will run again. I think there are a lot of Democrats who are holding their breath. Look, on the eve of the State of the Union, Biden's poll numbers were lousy. Only 37% of Americans approve of his handling of the economy. Only about a third of Americans told pollsters that he had accomplished a good deal during his first 2 years. everybody knows, Susan, that he's one fall off his bicycle away from reigniting all of the very legitimate concerns about his age. But I thought in the State of the Union, a couple of things were really interesting. One was he was much more vigorous than he sometimes is. He certainly brought his A game. He certainly went out of his way to try to strike a note of bipartisanship, turning to the new Republican Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and congratulating him, congratulating the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who's broken the record as the longest-serving Senate leader. And interestingly, I saw and heard some real echoes of some of Donald Trump's most powerful ideas when he talked about creating jobs for forgotten Americans, for people who felt invisible. That argument, Susan, particularly in the industrial heartland of America, where so many manufacturing jobs have been lost and so many towns had crumbled, that was at the core. Those themes were at the core of Donald Trump's success in 2016. Plus economic nationalism. You heard Biden not just talking about union jobs, talking about how all the materials that are going to be used to rebuild those bridges and those tunnels all over America, all those materials got to be made in America. And he was attacking also corporations for stiffing workers and for playing us as suckers and ripping us off. That is all the echoes of Donald Trump's arguments that were so successful in winning away a lot of the traditional blue-collar workers who had voted Democratic a generation or two ago. So Biden's got a lot of weaknesses, and Democrats got to be holding their breath. But I saw some interesting themes emerge in that speech. And then the next day in Milwaukee, Susan, he repeated the argument. He repeated those words. These jobs are being created for people who have been forgotten. That's an absolutely resonant idea that Trump used very successfully, striking that Biden's picked it up.
We'll see where that goes. Steve, thank you. Steve Roberts, political analyst.
Charles de Ledesma reports NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warns alliance ammunition stocks are running low.
The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production.
Stoltenberg urges Ukraine's Western allies to ramp up their military support in the face of a new Moscow military push.
The Russians are willing to send in those forces and take a high number of casualties. So for me, this just highlights the importance of timing. It's urgent to provide Ukraine with more weapons.
Stoltenberg adds NATO sees no sign whatsoever that President Putin is preparing for peace. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
U.S. fighter jets have shot down 4 unidentified objects in 8 days, the latest Sunday over Lake Huron.
We have been more closely scrutinizing our airspace at these altitudes.
Assistant Defense Secretary Melissa Dalton.
Including enhancing our radar, which may at least partly explain the increase in objects that we've detected over the past week.
China claims more than 10 U.S. high-altitude balloons have flown in its airspace during the past year. Another rescue in Turkey today. A 13-year-old pulled alive from the rubble in Hatay, but the confirmed death toll in the earthquake zone now more than 35,000. President Biden has fired the architect of the Capitol. The news comes as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he'd lost confidence in Brett Blanton. An Inspector General report found administrative, ethical, and policy violations, including Blanton misrepresenting himself as a law enforcement official. And the World Health Organization says Equatorial Guinea has confirmed an outbreak of Marburg disease, with at least 9 deaths. Marburg is related to the Ebola virus. Ben Thomas, AP News.
Nikki Haley faces a high wire act in her 2024 bid against Donald Trump. The first woman and person of color elected as South Carolina's governor, Nikki Haley loves to remind people she has never lost a campaign. On Wednesday in Charleston, she's poised to become the first Republican to go up against former President Donald Trump in seeking the presidential nomination. The announcement will be followed by visits to New Hampshire and Iowa. Critics say she'll be tested. Back in 2016, Haley said she was embarrassed by Trump and his reluctance to condemn white supremacists, but she joined his cabinet as a UN ambassador, and her public support for Trump continued even after after the attack on the Capitol. Supporters say she's a savvy executive who's been regularly underestimated by opponents, and her background as the daughter of Indian immigrants makes her the perfect candidate. She's not expected to stand alone in the ring for long. After the midterm elections, a wave of high-profile Republicans began to openly weigh 2024 bids against Trump, including South Carolina U.S. Senator Tim Scott, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and former Vice President Mike Pence. I'm Jennifer King.
More than 4 in 10 Jews in the United States feel their status in America is less secure than it was a year earlier. That's according to a new survey by the American Jewish Committee. The prominent Jewish advocacy organization conducted the survey last fall toward the close of a year of high-profile incidents of anti-Semitism. Those included a hostage-taking at a Texas synagogue and anti-Jewish statements shared by celebrities on social media. A quarter of the survey respondents said they were directly targeted by anti-Semitic expressions. Nearly 4 in 10 changed their behavior to lower risk to their safety. I'm Walter Ratliff.
With Valentine's Day approaching, there is a dating app, Grazer, called a meatless matchmaker for vegans and vegetarians. The British startup got started in 2017.
So our mission with Grazer is to help paint the world green, one meatless match at a time.
CEO Lewis Foster says opposites do not appear to attract when it comes to diets. People who are vegan or vegetarian don't want to even think about dating a meat eater.
I always found dating apps in general to be pretty soulless experience.
But Grazer worked for Liam Hawks. He ended up marrying Trine Bregstein.
It's really difficult to sit and have, like Liam says, a lovely meal with someone when you're enjoying, something that aligns with your kind of core beliefs, and then you're sitting with someone who's eating a steak.
The couple enjoys spending time cooking vegan meals. I'm Ed Donahue.
A candy maker is fined after workers fell into a chocolate tank. Federal workplace safety authorities fined Mars Wrigley more than $14,500 following an accident last year in which 2 workers fell into a vat of chocolate. OSHA cited the company in the June accident at the Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania M&M Mars factory, saying the employees were not authorized to work in the tanks and weren't trained on the proper safety procedures for the equipment. Officials said 2 workers employed by an outside contracting firm fell into the partially filled chocolate tank while doing maintenance work.
But first, your news headlines for Tuesday, February 14. A week after Turkey's worst earthquake in modern history, they're still pulling survivors from the rubble, but hopes are fading for those still trapped. Rescue workers are currently digging to try and free 3 generations of women from the same family, a grandmother, mother and small baby. Initial attempts to tunnel through to them were blocked, but they're confident they'll reach them. Meanwhile, a young girl called Mireille was miraculously found still alive, as was a 35-year-old woman. A woman and 2 children were also rescued in Antakya. The number of lives lost in Turkey and Syria combined is now more than 37,000, with the grief of lost families overwhelming, many blaming a slow response from the government. Crews are still battling major bushfires in Queensland, with the hot and dry conditions making it harder to control the blaze. An emergency warning is in place for the town of Miles as firefighters face down a number of fronts in rural areas west of Brisbane. A leave immediately alert was issued for the Mile Park and Hawkswood fire yesterday afternoon, with residents around the Nuddley State Forest near Jandaway also told to prepare to leave. There's also a watch and act alert in place for Montrose and Wyambilla near Tara. A number of structures have been lost to the flames. Luckily, there have been no reported injuries or loss of life. The US yesterday shot down a 4th unidentified flying object in their airspace in just over a week, the latest right near the Canadian border. This device had been described as octagonal in shape with strings hanging from it. It was shot down by an F-16 fighter jet over Lake Huron. Just days after, they'd also taken down 2 smaller balloons than a much larger one they shot down over the Carolinas, one that Chinese authorities claim was a weather balloon blown off course. One of the more recent ones, which was cylindrical, reportedly interfered with the sensors of the F-35 fighter jet sent to take it down. Authorities say they're not sure how some of them are able to remain in the air. China has also claimed that the US US has sent high-altitude balloons into its airspace more than 10 times since the start of last year, a claim that the White House has categorically denied. A second day of disciplinary hearings will get underway today, with brain surgeon Charlie Teo facing scrutiny after complaints were brought forward by the relatives of former cancer patients. The high-profile surgeon was restrained from operating without the approval of another doctor in August 2021, following an investigation by the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission. Testimony yesterday heard from those who've lost family members after being operated on by Teo or who were left with severe injuries. Dr. Teo is famous for performing surgery on cancer patients who've been told by other doctors that their brain tumours are inoperable, accused of charging huge fees and offering people false hope that he can save them. Dr. Teo denies the allegations. Queen Consort Camilla has missed several engagements due to what the palace says is a seasonal illness. They haven't specified what that illness is, but it was serious enough for the 75-year-old to cancel a visit to a ballet school and library in England's West Midlands. Doctors have ordered Camilla to stay at home and rest ahead of a joint engagement with King Charles on Thursday. Aussie cricketer Ash Gardner has landed a massive payday as she was picked up to play in the inaugural Women's Premier League in India next month. More than 400 players were on the list for the 5-franchise league, with Ash Gardner scoring a contract worth $558,000 to play for the Gujarat Giants. She'll be joined on the team by fellow Aussies Beth Mooney, who was bought for $350,000, and Annabelle Sutherland, who went for $122,000. Bangalore signed all-rounder Elise Perry, while the Delhi Capitals grabbed Australian captain Meg Lanning for $192,000. That's your latest news headlines. In a moment,